This next session is going to be on troubleshooting the session. So if a difficult problem arises, you may be unsure how to handle it. There's some common ones we can go over. If there's one that we don't go over, always ask Mr. Matt McLean, the office manager of the ASC, or Mr. Ryan Sweet, the director of the ASC. Number one, you may have a defensive or resistant student. If the student feels threatened by your suggestions or has an idea that the paper is perfect as is or doesn't want to ruin the work of the creative muse that might have placed every perfect word on the perfect paper as is, you may need to gently disabuse the student of this notion, because it's not going to be a productive session if you don't address the fact that papers are rarely written in perfect form, even for the best writers, in their first drafts. You might have to give some personal experience from your life. My first drafts are terrible, I might say. Point to specific areas of the prompt to convince the student that specific parts of his or her paper don't match up with the prompt. You can also reference your own experience writing similar papers if you've been in that class or similar classes. You can even look up information in the guidebooks or online with the university writing labs to back up some of your points if the student is less inclined to give you credibility. Number two, the student becomes emotional during the session. Often, writing tutors may witness a student who just cracks. It's like everything has been piling up, and you're the first person they can really talk to about something, just like one-on-one. So the nature of the one-on-one setting puts you outside of the teacher mode sometimes and more into the mentor, life coach, ally, advisor, nurturer kind of role that may be required at that moment. And that's according to Christina Murphy and Steve Sherwood in the St. Martin's Sourcebook for Writing Tutors, 2nd edition. This is another great source for you. Sometimes it's more valuable than the academic work that was going to be done in the session to address some things that the student is having problems with. If the student becomes uncontrollable, like crying, things like that, you may either just listen and let the student vent. You don't need to even give any advice, just nod and listen and be a supportive ear. Or if you're uncomfortable with that, you may just say, why don't you take a break? You seem upset. You could walk around for a few minutes. We can meet back here in 5. I want this to be a productive session, but I don't want you to be upset while we're working and things like that. Oftentimes the things that make students cry may not even be related to things in the session, or something that you said about that paper may be only the last straw. So don't feel upset if you make a student upset. Maybe several other things going on in the student's life. Don't be afraid to mention that we have free counseling for Walsh students in the David Center, and it's for anyone, for any problem. So they can stop by for that. You're not a counselor, but you can do some listening and suggest the counseling center. Number 3, the third kind of troubleshooting problem that you might encounter would be the freeloader. Walsh is such a small campus. I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me, just walking through the cafeteria or walking through the David Center, or me going to my classes. Someone's like, hey, miss, can you proofread my paper? I know you've done my paper before. It's been great. I got an A on it. Can you do it again? I have another paper due in an hour. The answer is no. Unless you're comfortable with it, and if you are comfortable with it, that's okay. It's up to you whether or not you want to take on additional by appointment hours. Unless you find a certain reason for doing that, I would suggest against that, because A, if you do it once, the student is going to expect you to do it always and rely on you for it, and B, other students will hear you promising that, and they will wonder why they don't get the same treatment from you or from other tutors. And C, you have a life too. You have responsibilities, you have things you want to do, you have downtime that you need to work into your schedule. You're not a tutoring vending machine. So that was something that was hard for me, because I knew a lot of people on campus, and I didn't want to say no, because I think tutoring is so valuable, and I'm so glad that they're coming to the center. But really, what I just say is, I'd like to work with you, but we have to go through the same process for everybody. All you need to do is go to the tutoring center and sign up for an appointment with me, or any other writing tutor. And that really helps. If I said yes every time someone asked me, I would have 25 extra appointments a week. And that's just not feasible for the budget here at the tutoring center, and it's not feasible for your life. Students need to take ownership of their work and schedule appointments well ahead of the due date. It's not your responsibility. Number 4, the struggling student. If a student misses sessions, repeatedly arrives late to sessions, as in like 20 minutes late, you've only got 10 minutes left to do what you can, salvage the session, or repeatedly does poorly on tests or assignments or papers that you've worked on with the student, don't feel responsible. You have done your best, and the student needs to uphold his or her end of things. If a student brings you a paper that you worked on together and the student is complaining about a bad grade, resist the urge to apologize. You've done your best, and the student needs to do his or her part too. You can suggest to the student that for other papers, he or she could bring in a draft, and he or she could bring in a revised draft a second time to work over with you, and even bring it in for a third revised draft to make sure it is meeting with the prompt. Also suggest that the student meet with the professor, because the professor may have more specific things to say than you can about that assignment or about that class. Instead, tell the student when you're confronted with this, everything cannot be fixed in one session. The next thing is danger to the student's self or others. If you see something in a paper or the student says something that makes you think that the student will be dangerous to anybody else or dangerous to themselves, comments like, I just can't take this anymore, things like that, or even worse, just talk to the office manager, Mr. Matt McLean, or the director of the ASC, Mr. Ryan Sweet, and they'll give you some tips for how to move on forward with that. This is per campus policy for campus safety of all students, and we certainly want to be handling this the right way. If you encounter any other difficulties during this session, or it's something that you just can't figure out a way around, don't be afraid to mention it to Mr. McLean or Mr. Sweet, and they can help you around those difficulties too.